Hey everybody, Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Welcome to hour number 7 of our nonstop GMAT Crash Course Marathon fundraising for Ukrainian refugee charities. This session is going to be on critical reasoning. Critical reasoning session number 2 of this block. I'm condensing all of critical reasoning into 3 sessions today. And there's a reason for that, right? It's not just that we have a limited amount of time, but it's partly that, look, if you simplify your approach, it's a better way to handle it. Keep your process nice and clean. You don't need to memorize 800 different question types. It's not really how the test works. If there's a conclusion, so critical reasoning lesson number 1 that we did a couple hours ago, if it has a conclusion, find the conclusion. Don't take the passage for a walk. Their words are my words. Same principles apply here, but this session we're going to go through some of the, I guess, slightly more exotic question types, a little bit rarer, fill in the blank, boldface, accept questions. Each of those kind of has its own little thing. Same basic principles. Find a nice, clean thing to anchor yourself to. Their words are my words. Keep your process nice and crisp. And that's most of it. We're going to talk about it specifically for a few question types. And yeah, here we go. Let's talk about let's talk about seafood. I like seafood. All right, let's come on back. If you need to pause it, go for it. Okay, so critical reasoning lesson number 1 in hour number, whenever that was, hour number 5, I think. If it has a conclusion, find the conclusion, be precise, their words are my words. Now we're kind of getting to that second tier of questions. Maybe there's not exactly a conclusion, but the question is going to kind of point you towards something. So in this case, it's asking you like, hey, what's going to most help to explain the surprising finding? Kind of a close cousin to paradox or discrepancy questions. If it's a paradox, we might say, hey, there's thing 1, but thing 2. And it's a really simple thing. It sounds really silly. I just want you guys to be super precise about saying, here's thing 1, here's thing 2. There's the paradox that I'm trying to resolve. In this case, surprising find, I'm not saying there's a thing 1 and a thing 2, but what exactly is it that's surprising? What is the finding? Because if you botch that, I know it sounds really silly. If you botch that, you're in trouble, right? There's almost no hope for you on the question if you take that finding for a walk and use your words and not theirs and turn it into something that it isn't. I'm having fun with the promotions here. What is not surprising? Gatehouse admissions, wonderful folks. Liza, thank you so much for supporting. Gatehouse is sponsor for this hour of the marathon, and thank you guys so much for your support of Ukraine and our charities. And once again, I think I might have said this earlier in this hour. It's all getting to be a blur. If you're watching this much later, Ukraine's not in the news anymore, not of interest, nothing going on there, which would be a wonderful thing to have happen. And you find this valuable, please donate to a cause of your choice. Find a conflict somewhere in the world. Find some refugees who need help, and donate whatever you think this is worth. 20 cents, 22 cents, whatever you think. All right, surprising finding with the barnacles. So the surprising part, just that last sentence, surprisingly, in areas where the tidal currents are weak, juvenile horseshoe crabs are not found to have barnacle populations, even though they seldom burrow. So the surprising thing, it's like, okay, the weak tidal currents leads to them seldom burrowing. But then somehow there's, let's say, few barnacles. What's exactly the phrasing here? We'll say no significant barnacle populations. Well, why is that surprising? Well, what we say kind of in the very, very beginning of this, and Javesh, good luck on your GMAT. We got somebody here taking the GMAT in 13 hours. Blessings to you, man. Thank you for sticking out for so long. Go get some rest. So why is this surprising? What we know about the juvenile horseshoe crabs is that when there are strong tidal currents, when they burrow, that leads to discouraging barnacles from clinging. So why is it that we know that burrowing in the sand discourages the barnacles? Then why is it that in a place where they don't burrow, in the weak tidal currents, why is it they're still getting barnacles? That's what we're trying to do, is figure out how that can be the case. All right. And one thing that's been asked a couple times on the verbal questions, I always write this down. I always write down 5 answer choices. I cross it out when I know it's wrong. If I'm not sure, I keep it in. There's no smiley faces, half cross outs, question marks. It's wrong, and I've got a reason why it's wrong. I cross it out. If I'm not sure, I keep it in. Because sometimes something looks wrong the first time, you come back later, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, that one was right. Okay. A, tidal currents do not themselves dislodge barnacles from the shells of horseshoe crabs. I'm not sure why that would explain this, because weak tidal currents is where they don't have significant barnacle populations. So why would that have anything to do with? So how would it explain that they're not getting barnacles in weak currents if it is true that the tidal currents dislodge the barnacles? That doesn't make any sense at all. So A is out. B, barnacles most readily attach themselves to horseshoe crabs in areas where tidal currents are weakest. Well, even that kind of goes the opposite direction, doesn't it? Wouldn't we think there's weak tidal currents, you would think more barnacles, right? And so B doesn't explain this at all. It actually goes in the other direction of actually kind of reinforcing the idea that this is a surprise if typically when there's weak currents, barnacles do attach. So B is out. C, strength of the tidal currents in a given location varies widely over the course of a day. That shouldn't have anything to do with it at all. It doesn't matter whether it varies or not. It's fundamentally, we need to explain why weak tidal currents, no burrowing, but there's still no barnacles, despite the fact they're not burrowing. So that doesn't make a difference. Hope we like either D or E. A very large barnacle population can significantly decrease the ability of a horseshoe crab to find food. Boy, you can get kind of crazy pants here, right? You can say that, well, okay, so if there's a lot of barnacles, then maybe the horseshoe crabs can't find food. We can get into some crazy thing there, but it's like, I still just don't see how this would really explain this. So large barnacle populations make it harder for them to find food, but then are we kind of implying that maybe there just aren't barnacles there at all? And you've just got to twist yourself into a crazy pretzel to get anything off a D. Cross that out. And E, until they're fully grown, horseshoe crabs shed their shells and grow new ones several times a year. Notice the language here. No significant barnacle population. What do barnacles do? Clings to their shells, right? It says that in the very first sentence. Discourages barnacles from clinging to the horseshoe crab shells. Well, if the horseshoe crabs are losing their shells every few months, no place for the barnacles to go, right? They shed it, and then it takes a while for them to come back on. So it could just be that no matter what, the horseshoe crabs losing their shells, get rid of the barnacles, shed them every once in a while. And that's why E is the case. Doesn't necessarily matter if it's weak or strong tidal currents, doesn't matter if they're burrowing or not. These juvenile horseshoe crabs specifically, that explains it, because if the barnacles aren't sticking around for very long because the juveniles are shedding their skin or shedding their shells, then that explains why it doesn't matter if they burrow or not. No barnacles for these little guys. Fun times. All right. Once again, I know I'm a broken record on this. Cross elimination, don't fall in love with anything, and just make sure you're anchoring yourself in whatever the question gives you. It's paradox, surprising finding. Find that thing, be precise with the language. 80% of errors we see. It's just not being precise with the language. All right, let's do another. And I left the old one up because I'm lazy. So part of why I chose this question is, part of it is an accept question. So very, very small bit of hygiene. This is great. And I said that and saw somebody making exactly the mistake. Very, very small thing. Again, name of the game, adaptive test. Don't miss stuff you know how to do. Miss all the hard ones you want. You'll be okay. Don't miss the stuff you know how to do. Accept questions. What I want you to do every single time. Very small thing. But I want you to write on your page. I want this staring you in the face. Cross out anything that blank. Now, the blank is going to be different depending on exactly what the accept question is, right? But I want this looking in the face. Here's the reason. If you have, let's say it's a hard question. I'm going to pretend that it's an assumption question. This one obviously isn't. And it's like, okay, I'm looking for, so which of the following needs to be assumed? All the following needs to be assumed except what? And I go, okay, well, yeah, it's not A because I know that needs to be assumed. B, I don't know. Can't understand B. Maybe that's the answer. C is assumed. D, I don't know. E, I don't know. Go back through. And then let's say you're down to 2 eventually, and you're sitting there going, okay, find the one that's assumed. Find the one that's assumed. It's like, D is the one I need to assume. And then you pick it, and it's like, well, no. D is the one you should have crossed out. It sounds really dumb. And I know that I'm seeing mostly right answers in the chat. And maybe they're going, I would never do that. I don't have very many students who I haven't caught doing that occasionally. It's a really, really, really easy mistake to make. Just do a very small thing, have this looking in the face so you don't make the mistake of, once you start to get in the weeds of the details of the passage and the answer choices, you don't make the mistake of picking the one that's the thing you should cross out. So in this case, what are we crossing out? We're crossing out the thing that supports the account. Great. So that's first bit of hygiene except questions. Just be religious about this. Whether it's critical reasoning, reading comp, doesn't really matter. You see the except, cross anything that does what, keep it staring in the face. That's one of the few things I really think you should have on your page. Kind of a mistake you can't afford. In this case, what exactly is the historian's account? What does that mean? So it's not like this is a clean conclusion. It's a little bit mucky, which I think makes it a little bit harder, not insurmountable. But what exactly do we mean by that account? Well, they're saying that they've kind of got this thing in the first sentence that they're trying to explain. So there's a sudden increase in the production of elephant ivory artifacts on the Mediterranean coast, North Africa, 10th century. Well, that's not the account. The historian's account here really is their explanation for it. So their explanation, basically what they're saying is, so why the increase? And we'll say ivory artifacts. And they're saying that it's because, so an area opening up as a new source of ivory, and argue on this basis that the important medieval trade between North and East Africa began in this period. That's the 10th century. Now, notice here, one of the other things I see quite a bit is people go, well, well, so supports the account. I get a lot of arguments on the forums that are I think are really productive. I think it's really healthy to ask these questions. Is but if this, then maybe it wouldn't support it. We're not looking for bulletproof. We're not looking for something that provides support, provides some support. Actually, is the way they frame the question. So we're crossing anything that not just supports, but provides some support. Very deliberate phrasing. There's one of these things that does not provide some support. The others provide some support. It doesn't need to be great, just some support, right? Very deliberate phrasing on their part. All right. Hey, so I'm going to cross anything that does provide support. In East Africa, gold coins from Mediterranean North Africa have been found at the 10th century site, but an earlier site. So basically what that's saying is that gold coins were getting exchanged in the 10th century for the first time between East and North Africa. Definitely provides support for the idea that the trade began then. So we can get rid of A, again, crossing it out because it supports. B, the many surviving letters of pre-10th century North African merchants include no mention of business transactions involving East Africa. Does this prove anything? Oh, no, not at all. But does it provide some support for the idea that this trade began in the 10th century when there was no evidence of it in the writing before that? Yeah, that's some support. I'll take it. C, excavations in North Africa reveal a 10th century change in architectural style to reflect North African patterns. So there you go. We see evidence of an exchange of some sort, trade route, information getting exchanged between these two places. More evidence that something was happening in this very important trade between these two in the 10th century. C is out. D, documents from Mediterranean Europe and North Africa that date back earlier than the 10th century showed knowledge of East African animals. Okay, so they show knowledge of it. It's not to say that's super strong, but how does that support this? It's saying that they knew, so in Mediterranean North Africa and Europe, they knew something about these animals. They knew something of East Africa before the 10th century. Well, that doesn't support the idea that trade began in the 10th century, right? It indicates there must have been some sort of information exchange happening before that. We can kill ourselves worrying about whether it weakens or not, but it certainly doesn't support it. So I can hang on to D, since it doesn't provide support. E, East African carvings in a style characteristic of the 10th century depict seagoing vessels, very different from those used by local sailors, but a type common in the Mediterranean. Once again, evidence of some sort of exchange happening between these two parts of Africa around that era. So that provides some support that that's when it all began. So E is out. D is your right answer. Okay. We're going to move on to boldface questions. These scare people. The quick hint on this, very much like anything else, I want you to focus on structure of the passage. So yes, you're trying to figure out what the boldface do, but first thing I want you to do is look at a boldface passage and go, is there a conclusion? How is this argument put together? Try to blind yourself to the bold. Try not to even see it at first, because in real life, So for most of you, if somebody drops a report on your desk at your job and something's in bold, or they give you a textbook, the thing in bold is pretty important, right? That is not the case here. We're wired to think it's in bold, it's important, it's a conclusion. The best way to fight that is when you look at boldface, try to wash your brains, try to look at it, not see the boldface at all. Break down the passage structure and kind of say, is there a main point here somewhere? Is there a conclusion? And then once you have that figured out, then backtrack and figure out what the boldface is doing. If you can do that, that's all I can ask you on these, besides just being precise with your language. All right. I'm getting a question about pre-thinking. The answer is that's more relevant for, people usually use that on assumption questions more than anything. I am not a believer in pre-thinking. And the reason why is that I think it risks biasing you. So this is a really good example of a question. And I'm actually glad you asked that, because we do get a lot on the forums, and I tend not to talk about it in these videos until somebody asks me directly. The reason I don't pre-think, really two things that can get difficult about critical reasoning. One is the language is just hard, and maybe you're having a hard time understanding the passage. So maybe for some of you watching, that's happening on some of these, maybe not to a ton of you, right? Or maybe it's little bits of it, but you're not getting obliterated for the most part, probably. That's one dimension of difficulty. The other dimension is right answers that look wrong, wrong answers that look right. Think about what that means. So a lot of the ones we've gone over today, I've been picking on you with fairly hard questions. It's things that don't necessarily feel intuitive. It's not the thing you would think of. Really advanced GMAT questions, it's not that the language gets harder. It really doesn't get that much harder as you get to an advanced question versus, let's say, a mid-level question on critical reasoning. The difference tends to be that that right answer is not something you would ever think of, and it feels totally counterintuitive. And maybe they've done something where it feels like the scope is shifted a little bit on you. One of my favorite questions, actually an LSAT question, but it same idea on the GMAT. It's this whole thing where it's talking about the space station and astronauts going to the space station. And then there's an answer choice about robots. And there's no robots anywhere in the passage. And if you've pre-thought, I guarantee you are not thinking about robots. And the robots are in the correct answer. My argument here is that pre-thinking can bias you. It can get you thinking about something that you're not going to see in the answer choices, number one, in which case you've wasted your time. And more importantly, I think it makes it a lot easier for me to get you. So if I get you anticipating something, I can write an answer choice that's just a little bit different. It isn't quite what you were thinking, but you might look at it and go, yeah, that's what I was thinking, even though it wasn't. You were going to be more likely to misread it. Bottom line for me is pre-thinking induces, I think, has a risk of inducing reading errors. I think it has a risk of forcing you to pick something, or kind of inducing you to pick something that's not quite right because it resembles what you imagined. And it has a risk of kind of making you less inclined to pick the thing that flies out of left field that's actually right. So that's my take on it. Now, to be fair, an argument I've gotten into, productive, good-natured argument's probably the wrong word, discussion I've gotten into with some students is, some people, when they say pre-thinking, what they really mean is analysis. I'm great with that. Look at all the time we spend breaking down the passage, breaking down the logic of it. Is that a form of pre-thinking? Well, it depends on your definitions. When most people say pre-thinking, they mean anticipate in an answer. I think that pre-thinking in the sense that you're kind of going through and saying, well, wait a minute, let me make sure I break down the passage. What's really going on here? What kind of thing? I'm trying to support this. Let me make sure I understand the passage really deeply. If that's your version of pre-thinking, I'm great with it. If it's let me imagine 4 answers here, I'm not sure it's that productive. I think it gets you into trouble on the harder ones. And again, different strokes for different folks, but I see a lot more harm than good done with pre-thinking in general. If it works for you, great. If you find yourself falling for things that are wrong, that sound like you're pre-thinking, that's when your pre-thinking is doing you some harm. So again, room for very, very smart people to disagree on it and to define it differently. I tend to be very, very leery of it because I do see a lot of students whose pre-thinking leads them to fall for answers that are wrong. If you see that happening to yourself, you might want to reevaluate your process. If it's not happening to you, then great, there's probably no issue and your pre-thinking is good. All right, rant over on all that. Next question. All right, let's do this. I have a feeling a lot of you guys in the live group are getting kind of tired too. I see the response is coming slower and slower. Granted, long passage here. So again, boldface questions. There's a temptation to just start going right at the boldface and go, what does that do? And what does that do? And what does that do? And take a step back, try to blind yourself to the bold as best you can, and think through, okay, how's this thing structured? Do we have a conclusion? If so, I'm going to run with it. So here, that last, I guess the last sentence, kind of first part of that last sentence, there's your conclusion, right? Like, what's the author's point? Really saying that museums would be rash to relax those standards. And then goes on to say some of the reasoning for it. I'm not going to write all that stuff down. But basically, because there's something other than the paint, right? There's the, I'm just pronounced gesso or gesso, a compound used by Renaissance artists to help the paint adhere to the canvas, that can't withstand the variations in humidity. So rash relax those standards. What standards are we talking about? It's those standards of temperature and humidity control. Okay, so now how does the boldface fit into all of this? So the second boldface, museums can reduce energy costs without risking damage to these paintings. Well, yeah, that's exactly that relaxation that the author's arguing against, right? So you can kind of look at that and go, well, what's going on in the, so first bold, second bold. How do we connect it to kind of this big picture of what's going on here? So museums can reduce energy costs without damage to these paintings. All I'm going to say here is that the author disagrees with this. And look, before we look at the answer choices, we know that it's not going to be a nice, clean language like that. Oh, this is an assertion with which the author disagrees. They're gonna make it, more messy language. That's what they do in these. That's fine. But as long as you kind of get the gist of what its function is. So there's the author's conclusion. This is the thing the author's arguing against. It's kind of the whole point. What's the first one doing? Well, this is kind of, this is support for the second bold, right? It's one of the things being said to kind of support this. So first bold, we can kind of say reason for, I'm just going to say argument in the second bold. So it paints the most sensitive subject in these works. First bold, therefore, museums can relax their energy costs. They don't need to keep up these strict standards of temperature control and humidity control. Author says, oh, no, because there's this other stuff, gesso, apologies for my pronunciation, that's going to cause a real problem here. Okay. So again, a lot of people shortcut this. You just kind of want to barrel through and go, okay, I see what it's doing there. Invest the time. So where time goes to die, critical reasoning, reading comp both, is when you haven't taken the time to understand the passage as fully as you need to. Now you can go too far and obsess over every word and get crazy. But if you shortcut and you don't get to the point of understanding it well enough, then your risk here is that you're going to get stuck in the answer choices and you're going to be back and forth. If you look at, let's say, your practice tests or your error log or however it is you're going about studying, and you see critical reasoning questions that are 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, reading comp as well, unless it's the first one in the passage, things where you've taken a minute or 2 or 3 longer than you should. What I want you to do is go look at those and say, where did the time go? Was I rereading the passage forever? Or did I read the passage, reasonably quickly, but I spent forever obsessing over answer choices? Counterintuitively, if what you're seeing is the second one, that you're back and forth between the answer choices, odds are decent, at least, that you underinvested in the passage. Very, very common thing when people underread, they go too quickly through the passage. That's when they get buried on the answer choices. All right, let's go through these. The first is an objection that has been raised against the position taken by the argument. The second one is the position taken by the argument. One of the nice things about boldface questions like this, where there's 2 boldface statements, is that if you know that one of the parts of the answer choice is wrong, you can cross it out and move on if you're sure of it. I'm in hour number 7. My brain is, I wouldn't say it's applesauce yet, but it's kind of cottage cheese maybe. First is an objection that has been raised against the position taken by the argument. Too many prepositional phrases. Brain hurts. The second is the position taken by the argument. No, it's not. That's exactly the thing the author is arguing against. Right there, I can be done with A. And I don't have to overthink. B, the first is the position taken by the argument. Once again, very much not the case. I can stop right there if I want to. We can split some more hairs if you want over the second one. C, the first is a judgment that has been offered in support of the position that the argument calls into question. Let's see if something better happens on the second one. The second is a circumstance on which that judgment is in part based. Okay, I guess I have to read this again. The first is a judgment that has been offered in support of the position that the argument calls into question. Here's the thing, is that really a judgment in the first bold? Paint is the most sensitive substance in these works. Would I call that a judgment that's in support of the, it is in support of position. I'm a little uncomfortable with that phrase judgment there. And the second is a circumstance on which that judgment is based. No, the second bold isn't the thing. So second is circumstance. The judgment in the first boldface isn't based on the second. It's kind of the other way around, if anything. So messy, but C is out. D, the first is a judgment that's been offered in support of the position the argument calls into question. Beautiful. So that's the reason for the argument in the second bold. The second bold, that's the thing the author disagrees with. Let's see what we got in the second half. The second is that position. Spot on, right? Author disagrees with that position. This supports that. First bold supports the second. D's looking good. Open mind on E, just in case I messed up. E, the first is a claim that the argument calls into question. Nope. The author's not arguing that paint, isn't arguing against the idea that paint is the most sensitive substance in the works. Not exactly. Second is a position taken by the argument. Definitely not. Second is the one the author disagrees with. And our answer is D. Quick question here, or quick wisecrack about LSATs. Obviously, GMAT question, there's no boldface ones like this really on the LSAT, or very, very few. And if so, they manifest a little differently. But notice kind of this language that's a little bit, I don't know, it's kind of divorced from the content of the passage. The first is an objection that has been raised against the position taken by the argument. We're sounding like lawyers now. These questions, as much as anything, practicing LSATs really, really helps you with these. It helps you to power through this language, just get used to it. It's not that it's beyond comprehension, but I think for most GMAT test takers, unless you have experience with the LSAT or you just read really dense stuff, when you first see the kind of language that's in these answer choices, your eyes kind of blur. Once you see it enough times, you get used to it. So LSAT's really going to help you with this, even though this question type is not on the LSAT. You just get used to the language. One of the big reasons we're proponents of it. The other, of course, being that there's an almost limitless supply of LSATs out there. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of questions, super high quality. So I know I'm beating that drum over and over, but big fan of the LSAT's going to make you better at kind of drilling into the meaning of these passages. Okay, I think we got time for one or maybe two more. Fill in the blank question on this last one. All right, seeing a ton of agreement here, which is great. And I think this one's arguably kind of more straightforward than some of the ones we've been doing. Again, kind of the theme of all the critical reasoning we're doing today, at least the first couple lessons, third critical reasoning lesson, hour number, I don't know, 22, something like that, 23. I'm just going to be doing really hard passages, really hard inferences, and kind of passages that are hard to categorize, you know, where the question isn't anything straightforward, doesn't fit neatly into a category. We're just going to try to make your eyes bleed, make my eyes bleed, because I'll be exhausted by then. Fill in the blank. Again, I just want to keep your process clean on these kind of questions. Stop and go, what's the role of the blank? What's the role of the blank? Get that nice and clean first. Pretty straightforward here. Turns out it is a kind of a strengthened question. But I want you to be really deliberate about it, because there is variety in these complete the passage, fill in the blank questions, where it's not always an explainer. It's not always a strengthener. It could be all sorts of things. And I just want to make sure you take that moment and go, hey, what is the role for the blank? So explain or support this, that this finding, we'll talk more about that finding in a moment, does very little to show that computer use tends to reduce TV viewing. All right. So what's this finding that we're talking about here? So recent studies have found that in the United States, people who own computers watch less television than people who do not. So people with computers less TV than people without. Okay, great. And why are we even talking about this? It's kind of what you get in the first sentence. The growing popularity of computer-based activities was widely predicted to result in a corresponding decline in television viewing. This seems to support that, right? So people who own computers watch a lot less television than people without them, supports that initial assertion. But we're looking to support this idea that the finding actually doesn't show that. So why is this useless? Why isn't it the case that since we know that people with computers watch less TV, why doesn't that support the idea that computer use reduces TV viewing? Okay, let's take a look at A. So many people who watch little or no television do not own a computer. Many people, that's nice. It's pretty irrelevant here, though, because we're talking about kind of on average, right? So people who own computers that reduce their TV viewing. Might be the case that there's variety in TV viewing habits among people with or without computers, but that doesn't change what we're going after, which is what's that relationship between computer ownership and TV viewing. So A is out. B, even though most computer owners in the United States watch less television than the national average, some computer owners watch more. Exactly the same issue as A, right? It's like, hey, there's exceptions here. There's a range within computer users and non-computer users. That doesn't change whether there's a relationship fundamentally on average between computer use and TV watching. B's out. C, computer owners in the United States belong to a demographic group that has long been known to spend less time watching television than the population as a whole does. This is pretty perfect, guys. This is kind of the correlation versus causation. People are fundamentally different who own computers. They never watched TV to begin with. If that's the case, then it's not the computer use causing the decline in TV viewing. It's that fundamentally the people who own computers just aren't really TV watchers. Hang on to C. D, many computer owners have enough leisure time that spending significant amounts of time on the computer to leave ample time for watching television. Again, it's this many computer owners thing. While some people, many people, a few people, whatever, doesn't really do anything to help us explain that overall relationship that owning a computer will lead to, on average, a reduction in TV viewing. And E, many people use their computers primarily for tasks such as correspondence, leaving them more leisure time for watching television. That sounds nice, right? Because it would kind of indicate that if you have a computer, it would actually make you watch TV more, which would refute the idea that computer viewing or computer usage reduces television watching. But it doesn't do anything about this. The argument isn't that computer users are, that it's untrue that computer users watch less television. The point is that the finding does very little to show. The finding of this survey does very little to show, and E doesn't speak to that at all. All right. And C is our winner. Nice job with that, everybody in the live group. I don't think we had any errors in the people that spoke up. The other 90% of you, please speak up. Tell us if you're struggling. Let's do one more. Let's get some food in here because all right. Seeing some lively discussion. Love it. Also super interesting to see kind of the pattern of what happens on the live chat. First people in sometimes have a very different consensus answer than kind of the next wave of folks, and this is another example of that. So again, a lot of what I'm going after here in kind of this second hour of critical reasoning is part of the marathon. It's questions that are kind of that second tier. It's not necessarily a clear conclusion. There's something else going on in the question. It's a paradox, a discrepancy, a fill in the blank, a boldface, something that's a little bit more exotic. Just want to make sure you anchor yourself really cleanly in kind of what that question is saying. In this case, justification for the attribution of the increase in soybeans to the weather phenomenon. I'm not even sure what I would write down or analyze here. I'm not sure if there's necessarily a ton, but we're basically trying to justify the idea that increase in soy prices was due to the weather, even though soy yields actually increased, right? So soy crop was slightly larger. So we've got a weather phenomenon disrupts crops worldwide. But soybeans did fine, slightly higher crop than average. So then why is it that soy prices went up anyway, even though the yields actually went up? Okay, what do we think of A? This is exactly the kind of thing I was talking about earlier. I think I was referring to kind of the robots and how kind of, depending on what you mean by pre-thinking, you can get in your way a little bit here. I am not anticipating anchovies in the answer, right? There's just no way. And if I pre-think and I get too locked into it, my risk is that I'm looking at anchovies and go, no, that's not what I was thinking. A's out. Let's think about it a little bit, right? Last year's harvest of anchovies, which provide an important protein source for livestock, was disrupted by the weather phenomenon. Okay, so another protein source disrupted, so less of that around. It also says in the passage, production of soybeans, an important source of protein for people and livestock alike. Well, if a competing source of protein declined in yield, then prices for all other kind of substitute products, so soy, other source of protein, are going to go up, right? So we can hang on to A. And again, really interesting conversation going about pre-thinking. Somebody asked about it earlier. Interesting to see kind of that conversation continuing a little bit in the chat. I want to be clear. I am not dogmatic about don't ever pre-think. I just want you to be very, very aware of whether it's working for you or not. This is exactly the kind of situation where I see people who are pre-thinking ineffectively. They'll get bitten by it. They'll cross that A. So just be careful. If that's not what's happening, you're pre-thinking and it's doing good things for you, cool. Just be very, very conscious of it. And don't assume that pre-thinking is always good, because it may not be. Okay, B. Most countries that produce soybeans for export had above average harvests of a number of food crops other than soybeans last year. Again, this is kind of your classic, like, well, some other things went up. How would that help us explain why the increase in soy prices was due to the weather? I can't see how that connects to it at all. B's out. C is the really popular one. World price of soybeans also rose several years ago, immediately after an earlier occurrence of a similar global weather disturbance. Okay, well, that's great. So there was another global weather disturbance. Soybean prices went up. But why does that tell us that that was the causation here? Because what we know about this particular time is soybean prices went up. Soy yields went up a little bit. Soy prices went up. So why is it that just because it happened another time, there was a similar global weather disturbance? Maybe that one did affect soybean prices, or soybean yields, I mean. We don't really know anything about it. It's really, really tempting. But how does that explain, how does that justify this idea that the weather was caused at this time? Just because there was another similar disturbance. Really tempting. But A is actually something that speaks directly to prices, right? So A is something that says, here's a reason why, even though there's more soy on the market, there's going to be higher demand for it. We've got a concrete reason here. C, we've got to make a bunch of assumptions, right? That it's the same weather phenomenon that affects, the economy in similar ways or whatever. We got to make a lot of exceptions or a lot of assumptions to get C in there. If you want to be conservative, you could keep it. A makes a lot more sense to me than C. I'm going to get rid of C. D, heavy rains attributable to the weather phenomenon improved grazing pastures last year, allowing farmers in many parts of the world to reduce their dependence on supplemental feed. That would actually kind of do the opposite, right? It would imply that the demand for soybeans should be going down, prices should be going down. So this actually doesn't help us at all. If there's other grazing land that can feed livestock, less of a need for soybeans, shouldn't cause this at all. Prior to last year, soybean prices have been falling for several years, has absolutely nothing to do with whether the weather is causing that increase in soy prices. And we are left with A. All right, once again, thank you so much. Gatehouse Admissions, thank you so much for your support and the generosity. A ton of GMAT Club partners stepping up for us. Gatehouse in particular, Liza, thank you so, so much for helping us out. This is the end of hour number 7. Hour number 8, a little bit of sense correction coming next. Thank you so much for watching, everybody.